So I'm going to go over the history of forgotten magic. Why is it forgotten? Why did we forget? Even among pagans and among pretty much anyone nowadays that believes in some sort of magic, there's all this forgotten magic that no one believes in anymore, very few people believe in anymore. And it's actually quite interesting because only 200 years ago, or maybe 250 years ago, is when, pretty much everyone believed in some kind of magic. And then it went from, that to absolutely nothing in a pretty short period of time, when you consider that basically the entire rest of humanity's existence, hundreds of thousands of years, we have believed in magic, and then all of a sudden, only the past 150 to 200 years, we don't. It's strange why that pattern. Why did it shift so suddenly? And the answer is actually right in front of us, even though a lot of us don't really think about it now. Nowadays, if you're talking about modern paganism, and I did just hint on this in some of the other videos, so if you watch some of the other videos, you know what I'm about to say. We talked about modern paganism only focusing on a very narrow viewpoint. It's only one way to do this, or this is the only kind of magic that possibly can exist, that possibly can be, and everything else is excluded. And that more ancestral, traditional paganism will bring in a lot of the forgotten magic, the kind of magic that that the modernized paganisms don't even believe can exist. And it's really intriguing, the kind of magic that these modern paganism people tend to believe in. Ironically enough, it's quite the coincidence, in my opinion. It's not a coincidence at all. There's a very, very good reason. I'll explain in a minute. But it's quite intriguing that the magic that they tend to believe in is the kind of magic that you cannot easily physically have proof of. So it's the kind of magic that someone might get a premonition or a vision of something, and then it come true later. Or perhaps they can read minds, or perhaps they're doing some kind of location spell, and then they find Johnny. So basically, it's the stuff that you can't physically, tangibly touch, see, feel, hear. Usually, I mean, if you're doing a protection or a cleansing or a healing ceremony, and all of a sudden things get better, I mean, I guess that means it worked, and I guess that's sort of physically proof. But it's not like someone sitting there shape shifting, or manipulating elemental manipulating elemental energies, or somebody doing telekinesis or something like to that extent. It's not something so brutally obvious, somebody changing the color of the tint, the hue, color of smoke in a fire. It's not anything obvious, and it's something that could be a lot harder to prove, and a lot harder to detect. When we think about the reason why all this forgotten magic is forgotten, there's a reason now why the things that the modernized pagans tend to latch on to, the things that you cannot easily detect. It's because for centuries, for hundreds of years, throughout all of the brutal witch hunts that went on throughout all of history, for probably nearly 1,000 years. It may have been over 1,000. I don't know the exact number, but it was a long time. They looked for things, and they were so paranoid, overly paranoid. But they looked for magic in every corner of the earth, and people who had magic and people who practiced magic were easily found out, especially when they did something obvious. They got so fearful that they actually started turning their crafting their flutes into things that looked like bows and cups. They started carving them into bows and cups, making them sound like animals of the forest instead of an actual musical instrument. And it was because they were trying to conceal it. Some people were so fearful that they didn't even want to teach this magic to their own children. So that knowledge, the people who it didn't die with them, the people who actually survived, the people who did not get hunted, and that knowledge and that wisdom didn't die out with them. They had the opportunity, and some of them did, obviously, but they had the opportunity to pass down that knowledge and that wisdom, but they simply did not, because they feared that if they taught it to their children, it would make them an easy target. And so basically, if they did teach magic, typically they did teach some magic to their children, but the kinds of magic that they passed down was the kinds of magic that could be easily concealed. And so they would teach this magic that wasn't obvious, that you could hide easily. But they wouldn't teach the stuff like shape-shifting that is brutally obvious. And that's kind of how Thins eventually faded into what they are now in the pagan realm of Thins, where most people do not believe in the more physical, tangible types of magic like that. If there's actually a historical reason for it, and people nowadays don't usually take the time to really sit there and think about it, but it really is. It really is quite deeply rooted in history. And the grim history is that people either died with them, the knowledge died with them, or they refused to pass it down in fear that it would make their children an even bigger target. So when you think of it that way, it doesn't seem so odd that all of a sudden people stop believing in that. But with the ancient magic, how that differs from how the ancient traditional magic differs from the modernized paganism. We still believe the same types of things. We still have the same rules, if you're truly pagan anyway. We'll still have the same basic beliefs and rules, but that narrow field of vision is much wider. It's much wider. And sometimes you'll run into, with ancient paganism, because of where the ancestral teachings lie, because they might have been taught by a specific tribe or something, that ancestral knowledge, sometimes you'll get pockets of people where, yes, it is that sort of ancient pagan, more open-mindedness, but they'll believe in this but not that. And then someone over here will believe in the exact opposite. They'll believe in that but not this. What I practice and what I teach is basically a very broad spectrum. There's not much that I rule out as far as what possibly can happen and what possibly can exist, what kinds of magic you can do and how you can go about it. It's so much broader of a way to do things, even when you get down to how you use certain spells or rituals or symbols or something. It's a much broader, relaxed options. It's not so one-sided. But at most it always has to, of course, follow the rules of paganism, no matter what. So, you know, it still always has to have the pure intentions and the sacred permission and all of that. But it's just the other reason why it's kind of forgotten is because, unfortunately, at this point in time, most people nowadays are not mind, body, soul ready, strong enough to even practice some of this more higher level, rare type of magic. It's rare because even if people believed in it, it would still be not as rare, but still rare. Because firstly, a lot of times you have to have a gift, you have to have a natural gift for some of this stuff, or you just can't do it. Secondly, you have to be mind, body, soul extremely balanced and extremely strong, because what that kind of magic asks of you is going to take all of your mind, body, soul strength. Your entire self has to be completely balanced for even a natural gift that you might be innately born with, for that to actually even be unveiled. Otherwise it'll kind of just stay dormant, or you might have it to a certain extent, but then you can't actually fully experience that, because that imbalance is blocking it from happening. And that is the other reason. So basically it's a lack of knowledge, it's a lack of knowing, and then it's also the lack of wisdom that goes along with that knowing. It's just one thing to know that it exists, it's another thing to know how to go about it, and to be in a place that you're strong enough to do that. So, and I'll talk a lot more about all the different kinds of forgotten magic in it later. But this is more so just the history of it, and it really is rooted deeply in history, despite everyone just shooting it down automatically, saying, "Oh, that can't exist, can't exist." Well, a long time ago, I was a gigantic skeptic, and even longer ago than that, I had a teacher who actually believed in the olden ways. He believed in the ancient ancestral type magic, and by that I just mean, you know, you're taught by, you know, your ancestors long ago that knew everything, that didn't have all these gaps and missing parts of the knowledge that people do nowadays. And so he knew of this forgotten type of magic, and he actually told me that I had this ability to do one of those kinds of things, but I would need to get to a point where I was ready. And he told it to me at such a young age. I was still a child, and so I really discounted it, and I discounted it all my life until I was about 22, 23, and then everything just started hitting me in the face like crazy. I mean, I tried to ignore it, I tried to shoot it down, I tried to any excuse I possibly could, and then one day something happened that was so profound that I was like, all right, that's it, this is real, and there is no excuse for it, and you know, I'm not the only one that is seeing this, other people saw it too, you know, now I know that this exists. And at that point I started thinking back about what my first, you know, teacher, I won't say first, but you know, first human teacher, well, teachers can be a lot of things, I talked about that in a different video, what he said, and that got me on the path to this forgotten magic, and then here I am today. So that's how I remembered, but it's different for everyone, and I really would just want to bring it back. So I just wanted to show a little bit of a history, and later I'll dig into a little deeper about exactly what forgotten magic is.